East Campus, what's up? Hey, it's good to be back here with you this morning. We hope that you have had a good week this week. I know that we are kind of going into the time of spring break, right? So as I said that, kids in here, you're super excited. Parents, you're like, can we please send them back, right? I get it, okay? But hey, we are pumped to be here with you this morning. Before we continue, can we just give a shout out to our worship team, our tech team? Like, they are really a huge implementation of bringing us before the throne room of God. And I just want to give them a shout out for all that they do, all that they kind of put up with in some sense, mainly with me, microphone, right? But anyway, so as we begin, we're going to be continuing in our series of the book of John. So if you have a Bible or maybe you have a Bible app, go ahead and turn with me to John chapter 13. We're going to pick off exactly where we left off this past week with Pastor Doug. Pastor Doug is out. Him and Miss Sonia have taken a vacation for spring break for this week. And so they want you to know that they miss you, they love you. I kind of told him, I'm like, dude, listen, you need to get away and rest a little bit, okay? And so it probably as he's in Missouri right now, he's probably even like, looking in to see what's going on. But he misses you, he loves you, he's excited to be back with you guys this next week. Do we have any baseball fans in here? Show of hands. Baseball? Awesome. So I remember growing up, I was a huge baseball fan. I made it all the way through T-ball, and then I think that was it. Yeah, that was my tenure for baseball, right? And so growing up, I was a big baseball fan, and the team that I really liked was the St. Louis Cardinals. And one of the reasons why, let's go. One of the reasons why is because being in Memphis, where I'm from, we had a minor affiliate team called the Memphis Redbirds, and so they would always send people to the Cardinals. I think Albert Pujols ended up going there, and he's a great player, for those of you who know baseball. But I remember my dad taking me to some of these games, and we get the little baseball bat, foam finger, and there was one particular player from the Cardinals that I remember, and his name was Mark McGwire, right? Like, some of us in this room, we've probably heard of Mark McGwire. Some of us in this room were probably like, who the heck is Mark McGwire, right? But so Mark McGwire was like the greatest. Like, if you remember anything about him, he set tons of records and broke records. He won the home run derby contest like year after year after year. And it seemed like he was just at the epitome of his career, and he was just in complete success. Like, he was the greatest. He was the GOAT, right? Like, don't let them tell you Barry Bonds or Sammy Sosa was. It was Mark McGwire. And I remember being a kid and seeing this player and thinking, man, I want to do what he's doing to be great. But for those of you in this room who know, Mark McGwire's story had a left turn. See, Mark McGwire, later on in his career, got tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. And so his career and all the accolades that he had achieved and received completely meant nothing. They would not put him in the Hall of Fame even until this day. He was willing to do anything to achieve greatness. In the eyes of the world, though. So much that it ultimately destroyed him. He wanted to be great so bad to the extent that he would do anything, whether it was approved or not, to be great. And I believe that greatness in terms of the world tends to look like that, correct? Yes. That greatness in the world we live in can mean a variety of different things. We tend to assume that we are great maybe based on the standards of our culture. That you need to do whatever it takes. You need to have this money and this house and this American dream to be great. But what tends to happen when we follow this standard of greatness is that people fall into only caring about themselves, building up their platform, building up their kingdom. And I think that today we need to ask ourselves, how does greatness come about when we take the focus off of our time? How does greatness come about when we take the focus off of our wants, our desires, and even ultimately ourselves? Like, what does it look like to step into true greatness through the lens of heaven, not through the lens of the world? And so today, in today's passage, in John chapter 13, we're going to take a look and what Jesus says and models for us to be truly great. John chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, we're going to start off here. Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Now, when it was time for supper, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray him. And so Jesus knew, verse 3, that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, and that he was about to go back to God. Now, we see that throughout the book of John, as we've walked through this, that Jesus had been telling the disciples and crowds that the time was not yet at hand. See, if we remember the crowds of people that were following Jesus and the disciples that were following him, they wanted him to overthrow the Romans. They thought, hey, listen, dude, look, you're performing all these miracles. Go ahead, reveal yourself. Let us be king, right? Like that's what they were after. And so Jesus consistently told them, hey, the time is not yet at hand. It's not time yet. But as we open into this passage, John makes it clear that Jesus knows the time for him to fulfill his purpose of coming to earth is now. Here in John chapter 13, his purpose is now. It is time for him to complete his mission. Jesus knew what was to come. He knew that within 24 hours, he would be on the cross. And what does he do? He decides to spend his last hours teaching and encouraging his disciples until his death. He loved each of them until the end. See, Jesus knew who he was. He wasn't distracted or confused all of what was going around him. He knew what his destiny was to do. He came from God and he was now returning to God. Everything that is unfolding did not throw him off guard. It was all a part of his master plan. He was surprised by nothing. The Father had given all authority and power to him. And what he was about to do was to show his humility and demonstrate it regardless of his position. As we continue, we see what Jesus does. And for many of you, you know this passage. Verse 4, so he got up from his supper, laid outside his outer clothing, took a towel, and tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet. That's kind of gross. And to dry them with a towel tied around him. So look, Jesus, after he's realized like his moment has come, he gets up and what he does is he lays down his outer robe. And so this is symbolic to him laying down his glory and his position. He is God in flesh, but he was willing to set aside his position to express his character and love through an act of humility. Jesus takes the form of a house servant. Like in this time, people traveled around in sandals or they were barefoot. Some of us in the room, they're like, hey, that's me too. I get it. So their feet would contract tons of filth. And so when someone entered a room, culturally, a servant would wash one's feet as an act of hospitality. Like instead of like saying, hey, can I get you a drink? Or hey, can I take your coat? It was like, hey, can I wash your feet? Kind of a weird introduction, right? Like this act was always performed by a person of lower status towards a person of higher status. But Jesus, who is the master, does it for his disciples. Like this has got to be probably an awkward moment for the disciples, right? Like they've seen this dude like do miracles and perform outrageous things. And they obviously had this thread about fighting to be the best in terms of power and position. And then they see their master, who is the Messiah, come down to serve them. See, I believe that serving leads to true greatness. See, the disciples wanted to be great, and they had a tendency of arguing with one another of who is the greatest. But Jesus is making it clear that the basis for greatness in God's kingdom does not come from power, status, or even authority, but instead through the act of humbly serving one another. If the master himself is willing to serve, why are we not? And I believe that the answer to that question, is that it is important for us to look at the crowd of people that Jesus is serving here. Judas, who would betray him. Peter, who would deny him. And the others that would disappear whenever he got arrested. I believe that we have felt similar experiences with certain people in our circles or in our tribe when it comes to serving. Like we've maybe been betrayed when we have served someone, right? Like we've gone all out for one individual and they end up like stabbing us in the back. Or people have dropped us even though we gave it all, right? Like we're willing to go and serve someone with everything that we have. And what does it lead to? Them dropping us and never talking to us or never speaking to us. Or for some of us in this room, we think that serving is a waste of time, that we don't get anything from it. See, regardless of what experience that we have walked through, or maybe are scared to walk through, we need to serve without hesitations. A few years ago, I was able to go on a mission trip to New Orleans. Our seminary, the seminary I went to, it's there. So I was always like that online student. Like, I kind of feel weird saying that. But anyway, I was that online student who got to go check out the campus a few times. I went on a mission trip down there. 2 things about New Orleans, okay, if you don't know. 1, it's absolutely disgusting, okay? Like if you step in a puddle, you got to throw your shoes away. I found that out when I was there. And 2, man, the city is really beautiful. Don't let the number 1 discourage you from going to New Orleans, okay? And so I went and we were serving in different capacities. We were feeding the homeless. We were doing all different kinds of things, deconstruction, construction. And I met a man who lived in New Orleans who actually attended our seminary. And he was in his 90s, okay? And his name was David Sneed. And I want to give you some context of why I'm saying he's in his 90s. He was a man who had no money, no influence, no platform, and he had horrible health. He was on the verge of losing his life. But he was still willing to serve others in the city of New Orleans. He gave up himself for others who might not even care about who he is or what he has done, regardless of his position. And a few years ago, this man actually did pass away. And somebody went to his apartment to kind of help clean through some of his things. And they said that they found journals of people that he had been praying for and opportunities that he would want to get to serve. See, Jesus had this mentality to serve without hesitation when it came to serving. He knew who would betray him, yet he still served. It was not what he could get back from it. Like he gave himself no strings attached. As Jesus is walking around to wash their feet, Simon Peter he responds. Listen how he responds, verse 6. He came to Simon Peter who asked him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I'm doing, you don't realize now, but afterward you will understand." Peter says, "You will never wash my feet." See, Peter is known for making big statements without actually thinking about them, right? Like he's known for kind of putting his foot in his mouth when he doesn't really understand the context of kind of what's going on. And so Jesus replies, he's like, "Look, like you don't understand the significance of what I'm doing. That the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve." So Peter, he doesn't want Jesus to wash his feet because he knows that this is a job for a servant. He's confused at what's happening. I think some of us in the room would probably relate to that. We're like, "Why are you washing our feet?" And Jesus tells Peter, he says, "Listen, if I don't wash you, you will have no part with me." And so Jesus was saying it's deeper than just bathing somebody or washing someone's feet. Jesus was saying that unless he washed away Peter's sins on the cross, that he could have no relationship with him. Unless Jesus offers himself humbly in servitude towards the cross, Peter has no way to follow him. And this is why Jesus says, "Hey, you don't understand what I'm doing." Like it's not just washing feet. See, Jesus is illustrating his servitude to the point where he will go to the cross and not wash his faithful followers with water, but he will wash his faithful followers with his blood. Verse 9, Simon Peter responds to him and says, Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Like Jesus, like Simon's like, okay, like Peter's like, hey, this is pretty important. Don't just wash my feet, wash my whole body. One who is bathed, Jesus told him, doesn't need to wash anything except his feet, but he is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him. This is why he said, not all of you are clean. Peter's like, hey, bathe my whole body then. Like he still doesn't get it. He doesn't understand what Jesus is illustrating. Jesus tells him that a person who is bathed doesn't need to wash anything except his feet. So according to the customs of these people, of these times, after a person has bathed once during the day, he or she needed to only rewash his feet. Kind of gross, right? Like they would take one bath and then they would just wash their feet when they needed to, because after a bath, they were considered completely clean. So what Jesus is illustrating is the disciples who had been justified through faith in Jesus did not need a radical new cleansing. See, the complete cleansing of the redeemed at salvation never needs to be repeated. But like the daily cleansing of the feet, the disciples needed a daily cleansing from sin through sanctification of God. See, we as believers have been cleansed with Jesus' blood at Calvary. We don't need a new cleansing, a new bath. Due to what Jesus has done on the cross. Instead, we need the Holy Spirit to lead us to be sanctified daily. He cleansed us with his sacrifice and the pouring out of his blood over us. See, Jesus makes the statement that each of them are clean, except the one who would betray him. See, Jesus knew that Judas was the one who would betray him and turn him over to the high priest. Judas was not clean because he had not believed that Jesus was the true Messiah. Verse 12, when Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer clothing, he reclined again and said to them, do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are speaking rightly, since that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should also do just as I have done for you. See, Jesus finishes washing the disciples' feet and refers to himself as teacher and Lord to show his heavenly authority. And what Jesus says is that since the disciples view him as their master, they should follow his example of serving others. That since he who has the utmost authority was willing to humble himself to the point of a lowly servant to wash feet, that they should imitate the humility of their master. He says, verse 16, truly, I tell you, a servant is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. See, the example that Jesus has modeled for them is not limited to just washing others' feet, but it's a push for them to see that they are no greater than he. So serving others is not beneath them. Look, to refuse to serve others, to refuse to humble yourself, no matter how high your position, is to place yourself above Jesus. This is why he says that a servant is no greater than his master. Listen, if he served, then so should we. Like, it's easy for us to criticize the lives of others instead of serving them, right? But Jesus says that we as believers, regardless of our status, our role, or reputation, we have a responsibility to serve in a way that is sacrificial. Look, if serving is beneath you, then greatness is beyond you. Our world thinks that greatness is achieved by having a large amount of money, a large amount of influence, a large amount of possessions. You're great with what you have. Even sometimes within church culture, greatness is sometimes viewed as what you do, not who you are. The size platform that you have. But Jesus is saying that this is not what makes you great, but the willingness to lay yourself down for others to serve is. Greatness is not defined by your abilities, your money, or even what you do. It is defined by your willingness to humble yourself, just as Jesus did, love and serve others. Church, listen to me when I say this. I don't want to be personally remembered as great based on the size house that I have. I don't want to be remembered as great based on the amount of money in my bank account. I don't want to be remembered as great based on the size platform that God has given me. But instead, I want to be remembered for being great based on my willingness to love God, love people, and serve others. But I believe that it's easier said than done, right? People are people. And sometimes serving difficult people is hard. But I think that we need to remember that people are difficult. Guess what? We are one. And serving people is hard. As Jesus is about to reiterate, serving those who do not deserve it. Verses 18 through 20. I'm not speaking about all of you. I know those I have chosen, but the scripture must be fulfilled. The one who eats my bread has raised his heel against me. I am telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am he. Truly, I tell you, whoever receives anyone I send receives me. And the one who receives me receives him who sent me. So Jesus tells the 12 here, he's like, look, I'm not speaking to all of you, as the push to serve and love others that Jesus has just decreed does not apply to all of you. Why? Because of Judas, and he was about to betray Jesus. But Jesus knew this from the very beginning, that one was to betray him. Jesus actually even quotes in these verses a messianic prophecy going all the way back to Psalm 41:9. And it states this: even my friend in whom I trusted, one who ate my bread, has raised his heel against me. Look, Jesus is quoting this psalm to his disciples to show that he was not surprised by Judas's betrayal. He knew what he was doing. And him picking Judas led to the fulfillment of the prophecy that was to come. And so Jesus tells his disciples this because he wants to encourage their faith for when the betrayal happens. That they would trust in who Jesus is and the purpose that he was accomplishing. That regardless of the betrayal, Jesus is still stating, hey, I'm the Messiah, I'm in control. See, Jesus wants the disciples to know that Judas's betrayal does not nullify their commission to go. That he was still going to send them into the world to share his message. And see, Judas was not really one of those disciples that Jesus was to send. And Jesus knew this. But Jesus set the example of loving and serving those who were around him that were not followers of Jesus. Jesus knew of Judas's betrayal, but he was still willing to humble himself to serve him. See, Jesus has commissioned us to go out as ambassadors to fulfill the mission of God. By sharing the gospel, which includes serving and loving others. Even people that we don't agree with politically. Even people that we don't agree with in their lifestyle. Regardless of their skin color. Regardless of their personal convictions. We are called to humble ourselves just as the Father had. I think we need to ask ourselves, though, how can we do this and take steps to do this? Because, like we just said, people are messy and it's hard to serve them, right? Number one, we need to meet others' needs before we meet our own. We need to practice meeting others' needs before we meet our own. In the world that we live in, it is so easy to just want gratification, right? Self-gratification. We want to do whatever it takes to gratify and please ourselves, that what we tend to do is we neglect the people around us. And so this week, we need to meet others' needs before we meet our own. We need to practice trying to meet the needs of others in different ways, forms, or fashions. Number two, we need to focus on the results being achieved, not who's getting the credit. Many of us in this room, listen to me, we don't want to serve because we feel like we haven't gotten the credit that was entitled to us. And can I say this? Like, we're not entitled to anything. Like the Son of Man came down and humbled himself and took on the form of a servant. And what he received was the cross. So for us this morning, look, we need to focus on the results of being achieved by serving others. What would it look like if we would go and serve someone lovingly, willingly? What could come from that? Not what am I going to get out of it? Number 3, we need to be humble. We often think that we can't serve because we're too good for that. That we can't set out chairs or stack chairs or go and reach our community because we're too good for that. We need to humble ourselves. And number 4, we need to look for opportunities to serve others. And I want to challenge every one of you this next week to find one person that you can serve this next week. Regardless of what that looks like financially, maybe giving your time, maybe helping with yard work, whatever it may be. I want to challenge you to find one person that you can serve this next week. Church, what would our lives look like if we would be willing to humble ourselves and love and serve others? What would our communities look like if we took the focus off of ourselves and put the focus on others? What would the world look like if a group of believers came together and said, hey, it's not about me. It's about the one who sent me. And because of the one who sent me, I am going to go and take his message to all who needs to hear that comes in our path. Let's pray.